Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Essays on the Gita, with our beloved Ranga. We are on page 32, beginning with the sentence, "Therefore it is a mistake to interpret the Gita," etc.
So we are in the chapter, the core of the teaching. And he has been discussing that the Gita is so wide and sweeping in its movement that there is the possibility of people misinterpreting the Gita to mean only that it is Jnana Yoga, that it is only Karma Yoga, that it is only Bhakti Yoga, but actually the Gita is advocating all of these paths together. So that's what he has said, that this mistake we should not make of thinking that's only concentrating on one and advocating only one path. So now we read what he is saying. Therefore, it's a mistake to interpret the Gita from the standpoint of the mentality of today and force it to teach us the disinterested performance of duty as the highest and all-sufficient law. A little consideration of the situation with which the Gita deals will show us that this could not be its meaning. For the whole point of the teaching, that from which it arises, that which compels the disciple to seek the teacher, is an inextricable clash of the various related conceptions of duty, ending in the collapse of the whole useful intellectual and moral edifice erected by the human mind. In human life, some sort of a clash arises fairly often, as for instance between domestic duties and the call of the country, or the cause, or between the claim of the country and the good of humanity, or some larger religious or moral principle. An inner situation may even arise, as with the Buddha, in which all duties have to be abandoned, trampled on, flung aside, in order to follow the call of the divine within. I cannot think that the Gita would solve such an inner situation by sending Buddha back to his wife and father and the government of the Sakya state, or would direct a Ramakrishna to become a Pandit in a vernacular school and disinterestedly teach little boys their lessons, or bind down a Vivekananda to support his family, or for that to follow dispassionately the law or medicine or journalism. The Gita does not teach the disinterested performance of duties, but the following of the divine life, the abandonment of all dharmas, sarva dharman, to take refuge in the Supreme alone, and the divine activity of a Buddha, a Ramakrishna, a Vivekananda, is perfectly in consonance with this teaching. Nay, although the Gita prefers action to inaction, it does not rule out the renunciation of works, but accepts it as one of the ways to the divine. If that can only be attained by renouncing works and life and all duties, and the call is strong within us, then into the bonfire they must go, and there is no help for it. The call of God is imperative and cannot be weighed against any other considerations. So we'll discuss this very interesting para. So we'll discuss this, what he's saying. There is the idea in normal society that one should do one's duty. If you are a father, you have to support your children. If you are got a position of responsibility, you have to discharge your responsibilities in a very conscientious manner. If you are the manager of any department in the ashram, you have to do what is done. You can't escape your duty. You have to give proper time and effort. So this is what is being said. Normally this is the understanding. So is the Gita doing that? Asking you to do his duty. He is a Kshatriya. Arjuna is a Kshatriya. And he's saying continue to fight. Is that what he's saying? Or is he saying something else? That's a discussion. So we'll see. It's a very interesting para.
So when mother left her son.
Exactly. That's
See,
it. That's another example.
Breaks everything.
She made sure that her son was looked after by somebody. She passed on the son to her relatives. And the call of the divine was much stronger. Same thing with Sri Aurobindo. In fact, his wife is complaining to him that you are not doing the duties of a husband. Then he explains. He says that there are many, there is a gradation of responsibilities. And Srimad has given many of them, and we'll discuss those. So, therefore it's a mistake to interpret the Gita from the standpoint of the mentality of today. We must remember that it was written 5,000 years earlier. So, today the idea that service to mankind, charity, at least in the West, okay, that's the noblest thing that man can do. The idea of God is eliminated. You don't even need to think of God, but my neighbor is suffering, help him. There are people on the pavement streets, help them. That's a very noble act. Certainly it is noble. But is that the spiritual life? That's a question. Because when you are doing humanitarian work, there is an element of self-satisfaction, which is the ego. So the ego is absolutely the contradiction of a spiritual life. So that is the point which is being made here. We'll have a look at that. The mentality of today is stressing or overstressing rather the humanitarian and the charity, works of philanthropy, and works of, what's the other word for philanthropy?
Altruism.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so this is what we'll discuss that. Okay, and you can't judge the Gita from the standpoint of the mentality of today and force it to teach us the disinterested performance of duty as the highest and all-sufficient law. It's certainly a high noble aim, but it is not the highest, nor is it the all-sufficient law. Nobody is condemning charity and humanity. If you are at that level, certainly do it. But it is not a spiritual life necessarily.
So when Christ says, if you have to leave your family and everything to follow me, that's a spiritual
That's right.
path.
Provided they do it in the right spirit.
Right.
Yeah. It's such a complicated question. Somebody may take that as an excuse to leave the family because it's a burden. So there's a lot of...
Yes.
So he has to, if the call of the spirit is real, then of course you are fully within your rights to take the higher choice. There is a choice he has given, we'll see the details. There is a choice between your duties as family and the call of the nation. If you have to go to war, you have to give up your family and go and fight for the nation. And if you have to fight for the nation or fight for mankind, not the nation, that's a more a higher ideal. And even if you don't do that and go do for God, that's the highest. So there's a gradation. And you can always choose the higher by abandoning the lower. Then it is justified if it is done in the right spirit.
Now I have a question for you, which is pressing upon me. In my own choir, I may have 70 to 100 people. And why have they come? Have they come in answer to a call? Why have they come to Oroville, not knowing anything about Oroville?
There are all sorts of cases, na?
Yes.
So certainly there are many who have come because they were called. There's no doubt about it. Oroville had brought out a book in which they had given the experiences of many people how they
Yes,
came to Auroville.
yes.
I read that, and there were many who had the call. They had no idea of Mother in Sri Ramdo, they had no idea, but there was very clear call that you have to go there. Circumstances got arranged in such a way that they had to come. So there's certainly no doubt about it, because life in Auroville was not easy in the beginning. You had to live in a hut. There was no water, no electricity, nothing. So certainly it was a deep call. But there are many who came because of the lack of discipline and a life where you don't have any duties. There's a lot of freedom in Auroville, just like there is in the ashram. Huh?
True.
So the same thing applies to the ashram also. There are many who come because they come from a social background of poverty and want.
Ah,
And so here they get everything, so they come. So I can't generalize, but certainly in the ashram as well as in Auroville, the true call is definitely there. Yeah. A little consideration of the situation with which the Gita deals will show us that this could not be its meaning. What is the meaning that is being thrust upon it? That it is teaching social duty. Okay? It is not doing that. For the whole point of the teaching, that from which it arises, that which compels the disciple to seek the teacher, is an inextricable clash of the various related conceptions of duty, ending in the collapse of the whole useful intellectual and moral edifice erected by the human mind. So, a father has a social duty towards his children. Okay, as we discussed, then every citizen has to satisfy the call of the nation if there is a need for it. So there is a whole gradation. So the higher is always justified. When you choose the higher, it is justified if you have to abandon the lower. So this is the, and he is giving many interesting examples. 3 examples he has given. We'll look at all of them. Okay. So in human life, some sort of a clash arises fairly often, as for instance between domestic duties and the call of the country, or a cause, or the cause, he's saying. Okay, so it could be any cause. It could be an ideal that you want to pursue, and for that you have to give up your family. That also is possible. For instance, fighting for the freedom of your country. In fact, that's in beginning that was Sri Aurobilo's ideal. I want to set my country free. I want to set India free. So that was the cause. It's not a spiritual life yet. But by the way, Sri Aurobindo was the first to bring in religion for his fight for the country. He is the first one to do that. You could have done that without bringing in religion, because you are fighting for Mother India, and her call is necessary. So he is identifying the soul of India with the divine. So he was the first to do that.
may I ask you to speak a little on a conscientious objector?
Yes, there the idea of freedom is important. This is the basic problem between the collective good and the individual good. This has been a problem all through humanity, and there is always this problem. Which is more important? Sri Aurobindo has discussed this in great detail. The individual has a right to freedom. If he does not have freedom, then he can't develop himself. But if he exercises his freedom in such a way that he is disturbing his neighbors, then society has to step in. Okay, I can't play music at midnight loudly. Okay, you are disturbing society. In India, this problem has come up now. At 5 o'clock in the morning, early morning, the mosques and the masjids, they start through a loudspeaker. Whether you want it or not, they are forcing you to listen. Okay, is that right? So there are some who say it is not right. If you want to pray to God, fine, but do it silently. Why do you have to wake up everybody at 5 o'clock in the morning? So this problem has been there all, and Sri Aurobindo has dealt with this problem in the chapter in synthesis called the standards of conduct. So briefly, since I've raised the question, I'll tell you. The individual has certainly a right to develop himself. Okay, that's the first stage of development. And when you are, even your ego and your selfishness is justified. An animal fights for its own rights, and so does the normal man. He has to develop himself, and at that level, it is justified. You have the right to just develop yourself. But as we said, you can't step on your neighbor's toes. Then there's going to be a problem. So society has to step in. And the second law of conduct is social law. Society tells you that you can't play music at midnight. They tells you can't murder somebody else. You can't tell lies. You can't encroach on other people's properties. All these are all social laws. That's the second law of conduct. But when the second law of conduct comes up, the individual is restrained in his freedom. I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this. So it becomes a drag on the individual. So that's why the individual revolts very often. And Sri Aurobindo says the revolt of the individual against the social law can be that of a ascetic. I don't want to have anything with the social law. It's too binding me down to things which I don't want. So he goes away to the forest and the cave. But he says something very interesting. He says, even the criminal, it's a revolt against the society. Even the criminal. It's a very interesting, if you look at it carefully, yes. So it can go into this way. So then there has to be a compromise between this and that. We'll come to that question of the conscientious objector. Then the third law comes in, that of morality. In the second law, the society is telling you to do what is right for the society and what is not okay for the society. So it sets standards. Okay, you can do this, you can do that. Even going through a red traffic light is a social law. You are breaking the social law because you're going to disturb others and you are likely to create an accident. So even that is a social law. It's conventional laws and it is not morality. The red light telling you to stop, there's no moral implication in it. Okay, you can't do this, you can't do that also. There's no question of morality. Okay, but when the morality comes in, it's the individual who sets his own standards, not the society. The individual says, I want to be a better man. I should not tell lies. I cannot encroach on other people's freedom. I cannot harm anybody. So these are the moral laws that come in. That's the third standard of conduct. But these, morality and humanitarianism is, these ideals are constructed with the mind of man. The last is a spiritual law which says total freedom. Give up all dharmas, all laws, and go beyond the laws. That's the spiritual freedom. So that is justified if you are pursuing a spiritual. Now we come to the question of the conscientious objector. There we are still in the problem between the collectivity and the individual. There are some who say the collectivity is more important than the individual. You have the socialistic pattern of society and you have the communist ideas. So there the collectivity is more important than the individual. The individual is bound to follow the social laws. But there are other ideas which say no. The collectivity is certainly not as important as the individual. So that's the difference between the capitalistic systems and the communistic systems or the social laws. So there are different ideas, and Sri Aurobindo says that the ideal solution would be a harmony between the individual's rights and the collectivity's rights. And that can only be achieved at the supramental level. Otherwise, the problem will always remain. There will always be a clash between them. So, in America and other countries also now, if freedom of the individual is important, then the conscientious objector has a right not to fight. And particularly so in America, it was very interesting because Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, he was one of the first and became a very international, of interest internationally. He said, I don't want to fight for the country which is doing wrong. So it's one more argument against. How do I know that my country is doing the right thing? What business has it to go to Vietnam and fight there? 10,000, 15,000 miles away, you are going and making a war somewhere where you're not even, it's not your concern. Why are you going there? I refuse to fight. It is illegal and I refuse to fight. So conscientious objector is allowed. But it has to be really a call of conscience, and you have to give arguments to show that it's not a sham. I'm not trying to establish, avoid my responsibilities.
But many would say that, I'll be a medic, but I won't shoot.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is accepted, basically.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, when you force people to go to war and you are not ready for it, okay, in the case where conscription is there, conscription means necessarily countries like Europe, in Europe you have only 50 million people population. So if you go to war, you require 1 million soldiers. What do? So you have to give training to all your youngsters for 2 years. Military training compulsory in France, in Britain, in other countries it's compulsory. When the call of duty is there for the nation, you have to go and fight. But this is something traumatic. Stemta has also discussed this, we'll come to that. It's very interesting. Here also he is discussed. So what happens? In America, all those veterans who came back, they have deep psychological problems.
Tremendous. I've met many of them.
Yes. It's a very interesting thing, and there's a lot of study done on that. They had to face situations which they could not bear. The burning of villages, the killing of children. They can't bear all these things. But war is war and they have to do it, the call of the country. So, the conscientious objector there. So, standards of conduct, it depends at which level you are. Egoistic self-development is justified if you are at that low level. But the social standard comes in, then the moral standard comes in, and finally you have the spiritual standard where laws are not needed at all. The only law is the divine. You have to do what you have to do. And that's a law being applied to Arjuna here in this case. So, in human life, some sort of a clash arises fairly often, as for instance, between domestic duties and the call of the country, or the cause, or between the claim of the country and the good of humanity. So that's the second level. First, you can have a problem with your family and the nation. But it can be nation against humanity. Just like the American war in Vietnam. Okay, I don't want to do something against humanity. You are killing people who are innocent. That is not acceptable to me. So that's a second thing. Then, or some larger religious or moral principle. So, an inner situation may even arise, as with the Buddha, in which all duties have to be abandoned, trampled on, flung aside in order to follow the call of the divine within. So what did he do? Buddha, before he became the Buddha, he was Siddhartha. And there was his horoscope said that he would abandon family and the world and go. So they were very careful and they did not let him go out of the palace for a long time to protect him from seeing the suffering and pain in the world. But one day he did go out and he saw 3 things which changed his life altogether. Old age, which makes for disability, very pitiable disability, death and disease. And then he found that this is the nature of the world and I have to find a solution for it. So he gave up his small child, he gave up his wife, gave up the kingdom and went away. Was it justified? Because he is running after a solution for mankind and looking for a solution for entire mankind. It is justified. What about Ramakrishna? Okay, he also was. Srimde is giving the example here. Vivekananda. Vivekananda was from a higher middle class family. They were well-to-do people, but his father was very generous, and he used to give a lot of charity. Anyone who came to him, he would help them. So they became. They ended up in poverty. Okay, and he was looking for a job, trying to support the family. So that's the other case. So you don't need to. This, if the call is genuine, the higher can always be resorted to by giving up the lower. In Sriramdo's case also same thing, as you pointed also in mother's case. Okay, she handed over her child to responsible people, and then she didn't see him for a long time. She didn't bring him up. But he was a wonderful person. A very fine man. Even from the normal point of view. One of his birthday messages, mother has written to him, to André, Bonfait, and with whom the love of the divine is there for eternity. It's fantastic.
Oh.
The love of the divine is there for eternity, not this life. And he was a very gentle person. He couldn't handle difficult situations where he has to scold people or something like that. He could not do. Mother has made a comment on that. Don't send Andre there. He will not be able to tackle the situation.
I knew him fairly well. I would send things to mother from him. And one day there was a two-sided problem about the purchase of land in Oroville. And there were some who said, you pay them whatever they want because it's their land. And others who said, buy it now because the prices will escalate. So I sent that letter to him, and he came out to the Matrimandir area, and he told us what Mother said. Mother said, buy the land now. You do not know the power of greed.
How right she was.
How right she was. Oh.
Because now there is a huge problem. People are coming and building resorts and all that on Auroville land. And if you have to throw them out, you have to pay a huge sum. Greed is operating. So, an inner situation may even arise, as with the Buddha, in which to follow the call of the divine within. I cannot think that the Gita would solve such an inner situation by sending Buddha back to his wife and father and the government of the Sakya state, or would direct Ramakrishna to become a Pandit in a vernacular school and disinterestedly teach little boys their lessons, or bind down a Vivekananda to support his family, and for that to follow dispassionately the law or medicine or journalism. There is a hidden irony in the whole sentence.
Oh, yes.
Not even very hidden, okay? To teach little boys their lessons. So, certainly, Srimad is pointing out that these things are so petty compared to the call of the divine. The Gita does not teach the disinterested performance of duties, but the following of the divine life, the abandonment of all dharmas, sarva dharman, to take refuge in the Supreme alone, and the divine activity of a Buddha, a Ramakrishna, a Vivekananda is perfectly in consonance with this teaching. Nay, Although the Gita prefers action to inaction, it does not rule out the renunciation of works but accepts it as one of the ways to the divine. This shows the flexibility of the Gita.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
If it is
does
necessary.
Not rule out.
Yeah. So, although the Gita prefers action to inaction, it does not rule out the renunciation of works. So, if it is necessary to renounce works, you have to do that. In fact, that's exactly what happened with Sri Aurobindo. He is working for the independence of India, and now the divine is telling him, renounce that work. I have a better and higher work for you. You go there. So he had to give up the physical work a little unwillingly at first, he says, because I was doing such a good work and an important work, but later on I realized that the shade of ego also is coming in, and satisfaction that you are doing something ideal, that you are doing something for the country and it's not a selfish act. So he could detect that egoism also, the faint shadow of egoism. He had no ego at all, but he could detect. He himself says that I saw that there was a little ambition and a little ego. So if necessary to give up, you do give it up. So it depends on the circumstances. Because on the one hand, the Gita is saying, Karma Yoga is certainly a path. You don't need to give up the working of what you are doing. You can be an engineer, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can do anything you want. But don't do it for yourself, but do it for the divine. So action need not be abrogated. It need not be cancelled. You can continue to act, but do it not for yourself, but for the divine. That's the whole conception of sacrifice, yajna, in the Gita. And Sri Aurobindo has got 80 chapters on this emphasis on sacrifice. How to do that and what is the importance of sacrifice. Not to do it for yourself, but to do it for the divine. So, it does not rule out the renunciation of works, but accepts it as one of the ways to the divine. Even if you follow the renunciation of works, in other words, Jnana Yoga or the path of the ascetic, it's valid for him. We don't need to make laws that he should not do it. It is preferable to do action in the world, but if one particular soul does not want to do and gives it up, it's okay for him. That's what is being said. That's exactly what happened with Raman Maharshi. He gave up the physical world, he gave up even his clothes, let alone money or anything, food also, nothing. He completely gave up everything. Only for the social conventions, he just had a loincloth, that's all. No footwear, no clothes, nothing. Perfectly okay for him.
But even Sri Aurobindo has said to many, this yoga is not for you.
Yes, that's right. That there are other paths which you can follow. It is one of the things that he told to Nishikanta. Nishikanta was a very great poet. He doesn't have a name because he came to the ashram and he never sought fame and name. But Sri Aurobindo thinks that he is a very high quality poet. Very high quality poet. And some of his poems are really Bengali, and Sri Aurobindo has translated some of them into English.
You have read them in Bengali?
No.
No, English.
The particular poem that he has translated, yes, I have read it in Bengali also. It's a very beautiful poem. The King and I. Next time, if I remember, I'll bring it and we'll read it. It's a small poem. So, this is what Sri Aurobindo is saying. That the Gita is teaching you not the giving up of works necessarily and doing your duties, but for the spiritual man, there are no duties. Only the call of the divine applies. That's basically what he's saying. The call of duty is imperative and cannot be weighed against any other considerations. But here, there is this further difficulty that the action which Arjuna must do is one from which his moral sense recoils. It is his duty to fight, you say? Same way he is raising objections to what the Gita is saying, and then he answers it himself. This is his style. It is his duty to fight, you say? But that duty has now become to his mind a terrible sin. How does it help him or solve his difficulty to tell him that he must do his duty disinterestedly, dispassionately? He will want to know which is his duty or how it can be his duty to destroy in a sanguinary massacre his kin, his race, and his country. He is told that he has a right on his side, that his fight is justified. But that does not and cannot satisfy him, because his very point is that the justice of his legal claim does not justify him in supporting it by a pitiless massacre, destructive to the future of his nation. Is he then to act dispassionately in the sense of not caring whether it's a sin or what its consequences may be, so long as he does his duty as a soldier? This is the question that comes up. Disinterested work, should you even do disinterested work which is morally wrong? That's the whole question. Okay, so that may be the teaching of a state, of politicians, of lawyers, of ethical casuists. So this is exactly the problem we discussed about the conscientious objector. Yeah. So that the state is saying you have to follow what the nation is saying. So that's what it is. Of politicians, of lawyers, of ethical casuists. A casuist is one who uses a double language. Okay. He says something but he means something else, and it can be interpreted in two ways. Okay. Double talkers, that's casuistry. Double talk, ambivalent talk, equivocation. Yeah, that is casuistry. So, is it that? So he says, it can never be the teaching of a great religious and philosophical scripture which sets out to solve the problem of life and action from the very roots. That could not be the meaning of the Gita. And if that is what the Gita has to say on a most poignant moral and spiritual problem, we must put it out of the list of the world's scriptures and thrust it, if anywhere, then into our library of political science and ethical casuistry. If that's what the Gita means, put it for political. It's a political theme. You have to do your duty, whether it is moral or not. That is not what Arjuna is being told. Arjuna is being told that you have to fight for the divine, and if the divine tells you to fight, fight. If the divine tells you not to fight, don't fight. It's a divine call that you have to listen to, not your mind. Your moral ideas are all coming from your mind. Rise above the mind and listen to what the divine is telling you. And in this case, Arjuna is being told to continue the same work. In Srinivas's case, he was told, discontinue your work and go to a better work. So he has to listen to the call of the divine. There is no absolute rule that you have to continue the action that you are doing. If necessary, you can give it up. That's what he has said earlier also. That the giving up, renunciation of works is okay, provided the circumstances need it and demand it, and the divine is telling you to give it up. There is a great flexibility in the whole thing. So, I think it's fairly simple. Yes. So we can go to the next one. Yes. Undoubtedly, the Gita does, like the Upanishads, teach the equality which rises above sin and virtue, beyond good and evil, but only as a part of the Brahmic consciousness, and for the man who is on the path and advanced enough to fulfill the supreme rule. It does not preach indifference to good and evil for the ordinary life of man, where such a doctrine would have the most pernicious consequences. On the contrary, it affirms that the doers of evil shall not attain to God. Therefore, if Arjuna simply seeks to fulfill in the best way The ordinary law of man's life, disinterested performance of what he feels to be a sin, a thing of hell, will not help him, even though that sin be his duty as a soldier. He must refrain from what his conscience abhors, though 1,000 duties were shattered to pieces. So, this is a very interesting question. What is actually meant by samatha? Any action, you should be absolutely impervious to any action. Suppose you have to kill somebody, okay? Steal, you'll do it without any reaction. That's exactly what he's saying. No, you have to use your discrimination. So, only if the Brahmic consciousness, it's part of the Brahmic consciousness. You have to rise to that level, and then you will see that you are above good and evil. You are above the dualities. That is okay. That is the true equality. I treat my enemy and my friend here with absolute equality? No, certainly not. You have to deal with them differently. But you are not affected by it. Equality means that you are not affected by what's coming in. But your dealing will be different. An interesting example will make this clear. Suppose a mother has 4 children. Okay? 2 of them are normal. One is blind and one is lame. Will she love them all equally? She should and she will. Love all her children equally. But will her treatment of them be the same? Certainly not. She'll have to give more attention to the blind and the lame. So it's not what you are doing that matters, but the attitude with which you are doing. That is equal. You love all equally, but not with likes and dislikes. Equality means no likes and dislikes. That's meaning. So, undoubtedly the Gita does, like the Upanishads, teach the equality which rises above sin and virtue, beyond good and evil, but only as part of the Brahmic consciousness. When you are in the Brahmic consciousness, that equality will come. They are not asking you to be equal to something going on wrong and you are, I am equal to it, let it be, I don't mind. That's wrong. You have to fight against the evil when you are seeing evil. So, and for the man who is on the path and advanced enough to fulfill the supreme rule, it does not preach indifference to good and evil for the ordinary life of man, where such a doctrine would have the most pernicious consequences. So suppose there is a person who is doing wrong, you tell him, continue to do what you are doing, but remain equal to whatever you are doing. It can be a disaster. That's what he's saying. So, on the contrary, it affirms that the doers of evil shall not attain to God. So, when you are at ordinary level, equality is not to be misinterpreted. When you go to the higher level of consciousness, equality matters. So, therefore, if Arjuna simply seeks to fulfill in the best way the ordinary law of man's life, disinterested performance of what he feels to be a sin, a thing of hell, will not help him, even though that sin be his duty as a soldier. He must refrain from what his conscience abhors, though 1,000 duties were shattered to pieces. So, he is right at his level in refusing to do a thing which is morally not acceptable to him. So then why is Krishna telling him to continue? Because he is telling him, don't remain in your level of consciousness which is accepting morality. Rise to the level, Brahmic consciousness level, where morality is not the standard. There, from that level, you act. And from that level, do what the divine is telling you to do. Rise to the next level of consciousness. That is the teaching of the Gita. We must remember that duty is an idea which in practice rests upon social conventions. We may extend the term beyond its proper connotation and talk of our duty to ourselves, or we may, if we like, say in a transcendent sense that it was Buddha's duty to abandon all, or even that it is the ascetic's duty to sit motionless in a cave. But this is obviously to play with words. Duty is a relative term and depends upon our relation to others. It is a father's duty as a father to nurture and educate his children. A lawyer's to do his best for his client, even if he knows him to be guilty and his defense to be a lie. The soldiers to fight and shoot in order, to order. A soldier's to fight and shoot to order, even if he kills his own kin and countrymen. A judge's to send the guilty to prison and hang the murderer. And so long as these positions are accepted, the duty remains clear. Practical matter, of course, even when it is not a point of honor or affection and overrides the absolute religious or moral law. But if the inner view is changed, if the lawyer is awakened to the absolute sinfulness of falsehood, the judge becomes convinced that capital punishment is a crime against humanity, the man called upon to the battlefield feels, like the conscientious objector of today, or a Tolstoy would feel, that in no circumstances is it permissible to take human life any more than to eat human flesh. It is obvious that here the moral law, which is above all relative duties, must prevail, and that law depends on no social relation or conception of duty, but on the awakened inner perception of man, the moral being. So, it's a very interesting para. We'll have to discuss it in detail.